which is title making, formulating objective, and formulating the hypothesis for our research study. So what it is about, what is a title of a study? The title is the selling slogan of the study, where you can tell the world what you are doing or attract them to read your paper. So this is a snapshot of my, in front of you on your screens, this is a snapshot of my recent paper in the JPMA, rolling out COVID-19 vaccine, half the battle won. So with this title, something comes into your mind, what it is about. So that may be the plus or the negative point of any title. If the title is able to attract the reader to read further, that's the plus point. Or if it is otherwise, that's a negative point. So read this title, please. Risky Business, Linking Toxoplasma gondii Infection and Entrepreneurship Behaviors Across Individuals and Countries. So it's a mix of East and West, maybe. Toxoplasma gondii infection is a clinical thing, is a thing for the clinician and the doctors, the hospitalist. And entrepreneurship is something related to the management side. How come these two could be related? This is an interesting thing. And this snapshot is from the PubMed Central. I hope you will be attracted to this title. The next title in front of you is Toxoplasma gondii, a trigger of bipolar disorder. Wow. Could the psychiatric condition be connected to Toxoplasma gondii? Another title in front of you, periodontitis, the oral infections or the gums bleeding and the poor oral health and halitosis, bad breath, things like that, is a risk for delivery of premature labor and low birth weight infants. So all of these titles has something to attract the reader. And there's the plus point of any title. So how do you make title and objectives and the hypothesis? It depends and it decides whether your reader will be attracted to you, to your full paper or not. So the objective of this lecture would be to define a statement, objective statement of a scientific study. You should be able to write proper study objectives. You should be able to identify the correct terminologies to be used in the objective statement. And what type of research is feasible you can do at your undergrad level. In this very lecture, you will be able to concentrate on what are the priorities for selecting topic and how can you conduct a feasible research study within limited resources. And to some extent, and in some research studies, you need to have a research hypothesis. What is research hypothesis and how do you formulate it? We'll discuss it. So we have many things to discuss in today's lecture, but I would prefer having your questions at the end of this lecture, and maybe I can grant more time for question and answers. So what is an objective? An objective is an intent statement where the researchers tell the reader or the rest of the world what he or she wants to do in clear and measurable terms. I put this picture here. It is the Dow graduate pictures from the 1968. And just to attract you to this slide, Why did I put this picture? I'll tell you a bit later. So what if there is no objective in your research study? What happened then? If you don't have any research objective and you have started a research project, what you will do? What happened then? You will be nowhere. I think you will be nowhere. Why? Because you don't know what to collect data, what variables to include, what questions to ask, and what people and which persons to contact, and what population to be targeted, and how would you analyze the data. So all of these questions will be in confusions if you don't have objectives. So without clearly written research objective, all the endeavors will be a confused endeavors, and you will not be able to collect a valid data for your study. So what are the examples of different type of objective statement? For example, the first one. First example is an example of objective statement which says, to determine the frequency of anemia in pregnant women visiting tertiary care facilities of Sindh. Here what we are doing? We are specifically telling the reader or the reviewer that we are trying to find out, we will try to find out in whom? In pregnant women, who will be visiting the tertiary care facilities of Sindh province. So to a good extent, we are very focused. So for a good objective, remember the mnemonic or acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Specific, measurable, achievable, repeatable, and time-bound. So this objective just like what? The time-bound thing. This could be changed to, this objective statement could be changed to the SMART objective, like to determine the frequency of anemia in pregnant women visiting tertiary care facilities of Sindh during January 2021 till December 2021. Now this study is time-bound, and now these objectives are SMART. Second example of a research objective, to determine association between maternal smoking and low birth weight. Now you can perceive many things are lacking in this objective. We don't know where we are conducting a study, and we don't know what is the time boundaries. So we should include in this objective these two things to make it SMART. However, comparing to the first objective, this second objective is a bit different thing. What we can see here is, number one objective is a different type of study design where we are trying to find out the proportion of pregnant women who are anemic. However, in the second example, the objective statement is about relationship. There is a term between, and between is, there would be two things, and those two things are, one is the cause and the other is effect. Cause is maternal smoking and the effect is low birth weight. That means the researcher is trying to make a relationship between maternal smoking and low birth weight. It's an association study or a comparative study, or we can label it as analytical study, or it's a relationship study. We'll see further what it has for us. The third example. In the third example, we are very upfront in saying that we are comparing something. So yes, it is an analytical study to compare the effectiveness of dressing A versus dressing B, in whom? In the patients who presented with infected wounds of the foot. at a tertiary care hospital during this period, that would complete the statement as a smart statement. So this objective is another thing, and it is different from number 1 and number 2. How come? Because here we are upfront stating that we are comparing what? Effectiveness. This term effectiveness is a term which has a very limited use, and most of the time it is used for experimental studies and RCTs. So this study design will more likely be an experiment. So number 4th objective. Number 4th objective is to analyze the characteristics of COVID-19 patients who received ventilator support at a teaching hospital in Karachi during January 2020 till December 2020 to make it SMART. And remember, SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, repeatable, and time-bound. So to analyze the characteristics of COVID-19 patients, what we are doing here, we are trying to gather all the patients who have been on ventilator and who were affected by COVID-19. So we are not doing any cross-sectional study. Instead, we are intending to do a case series type of study. All the cases of COVID-19 who required ventilator support, what were their characteristics? Not many people with COVID-19 required ventilator support, mind it. Although it's a deadly disease, despite that, not many people required ventilator support, as the statistics says for the Sindh province in the past 1 year or so. Right? So these are 4 different objectives, and a good research objective is self-explanatory. It should tell the reader what design of a study it is. So for the first objective, that was a cross-sectional study. For the second objective, that was a comparative study, and it could be what design? It could be a comparative cross-sectional study. To some school of thought, there is no such design like comparative cross-sectional study. So I won't go into the dispute of this comparative cross-sectional studies or cross-sectional studies, plain cross-sectional studies, but you are free to browse the internet and read the authentic literature where the comparative cross-sectional studies is already being stated. The third objective is clearly stating that's an experiment. And the fourth objective was a case series. What else we can determine from these objective statements? An objective statement is prepared or formulated against a problem statement. We have a problem to solve. The researcher has a problem to solve, and the researcher state the problem in question form. And then the researcher formulate his or her research objective according to the problem statement. So for this number 1 example, what was our problem statement? The problem statement was, what proportion of pregnant women are anemic in the province of Sindh? To solve this problem, we had a research objective that says to determine the frequency of anemia in pregnant women visiting tertiary care facilities of Sindh, right? So your problem statement reflects your study objectives and vice versa. Similarly, for the second objective, the question was, what is the relationship between maternal smoking and low birth weight? And to solve this problem, we formulate our research objective accordingly. Similarly, for the number 3 objective, the question was, is dressing A is better than dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot. Apologies for the X and Y. Just to streamline with the objective statement, I switched the X and Y with A and B. So is dressing A better than dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot? This was the question. We had two dressings. One is antibiotic impregnated dressing and the other was plain plain petroleum jelly gauze. And we were trying to find out, is it better to give the patient who have an infected wound of the foot with antibiotic impregnated dressing or plain dressing? Plain dressing, because not every time you need antibiotics to treat some infections. Some of the infection may go away with time or with some other systemic antibiotics. For the fourth objective, our question was, what are the characteristics of COVID-19 patients who are on ventilator support? So we have a question in our mind कि जो भी वेंटिलेटर पे जाता है कोविड-19 का पेशेंट, उसकी एज कितनी होती है, उसका जेंडर क्या होता है, वो स्मोकिंग करता है, वो अल्कोहल यूज करता है या उसके कोमॉर्बिडिटीज हैं, blah blah. So you can find out those characteristics of COVID-19 patients who required ventilator support. In all of, excuse me, भाई लेक्चर हो रहा है, excuse me, लेक्चर हो रहा है, वीडियो चल रही है, apologies. So in all of these study designs and for all of these study objective, we may not require any hypothesis. So hypothesis is at the very bottom. Some of these objective statement will require hypothesis statement, and what hypothesis statement is, we'll see a bit later when maybe I'll come back to this slide. So as I said before in the previous lecture, that objective section or objective statement is one of the most important section of any proposal, project, protocol, or a research paper. Everything in your study will depend on your objective statement. So you should formulate your objective statement with very care and diligently. So as I said before in the previous lecture, your research design, what design you will have, what variables you will select, and how you will analyze the data, it all depends on your objective statement. It's all interconnected. And the title and conclusion of your research, as well as your hypothesis, will also be a reflection of your objective statement. So that's a diagram called Johnson's diagram and Johnson's rating diagram, some people call it. Whenever we do research, as I said, but not all of the research is done to solve problems. So this diagram is showing you that what research is required to solve the problem and which one is not. The dotted line, the dashed line, is dividing this whole picture into two halves. And the top one is indicating that you are doing a simple research where you are not, the researcher is just to find out what is the problem. On top, he will observe the situation and submit his or her analysis. That's it. Whether the problem will be solved on the basis of that analysis or not, that's not the objective of that researcher. However, for other researches where we do research to solve problem, we decide on the basis of that analysis. Whatever the data is processed, we make decisions on the basis of that data, and we execute those decisions and take responsibility, and then again do research. So the top one is mere research, and the bottom one is problem solving research. Both of the research is valid, and you can do any type of or both type of research. Okay, so for the topic selection, how you will select topic, you should require more and more readings. If you don't read, you can't select a good topic. So your topic must be relevant. Your relevance is in terms of where you are working. For example, you are working in Pakistan, so your topic must be relevant to the Pakistani situation. For example, do we need to study HIV/AIDS? Yes. Do we need to study COVID-19? Yes. Do we need to study phenylketonuria? Maybe not. Do we need to study celiac disease? Yes. Do we need to study COPDs, tuberculosis? Yes. But do we need to study nasopharyngeal carcinoma? Maybe not. Maybe not at your level, because at undergrad level, that question may be above your resources. So that's not relevant at your level. So your question must be, your topic must be innovative. Innovation, by the definition, it says that topic must not be conducted ever before. So maybe that's not possible. But innovative in terms of what it is offering. Is it adding something new to the pool of the knowledge? What we already know, are you creating new knowledge into that pool? If yes, that's your topic is innovative. The feasibility of your topic. If you are planning a research protocol or proposal where the proposal is costing millions of rupees, which are out of the context, or you can't grab that much funding, or you don't have that much money to spend, that's out of question. So feasibility is in terms of resources, man, money, material, and methods. So for example, hi-fi techniques, hi-fi softwares, manpower, more money required, more time is required. For example, if you want to follow up for the development of cancer, so you may need to follow for 20 years, 25 years. So as a researcher, we don't have that much time. That long follow-up requires institutional backup. A whole lot body is required to follow up that long. Acceptability. Your topic must be acceptable to the authorities and to the patients as well. You can't do some intimate testing. For example, you want to do HPV testing, human papillomavirus testing. Would you be able to take samples from the patients who are visiting the general OPD for some common ailments? No, that's not possible, because patients will be expecting you will give them anti-allergics or painkillers, and when at the end of the interview you will ask them, we have provided you some treatment, but we are doing a research study in which we are taking samples for human papillomavirus infection, and the procedure is this, quite an intimate procedure. So would that person will be consenting to you? Maybe not. So acceptability in terms of example, you intend to collect data from a shopping mall, but the procedures of your study may create a chaos if you conduct that study in the shopping mall. For example, if you are taking samples for COVID-19 in the shopping mall, so there would be a rush or a kind of spectators around you if you are doing that whole process in open in the shopping mall. So that won't be acceptable to the authorities, maybe the mall authorities or maybe the health authorities. Your study must be cost effective. If you are trying to produce new knowledge, that new knowledge should worth for the money you are putting in. If you are putting in, for example, millions of rupees just to find out what is the normal flora of your skin or of the patients, so that's a fact we already know for most of the time. So that's not cost effective. If you are putting 1 million rupees to find out a fact that is new, but that fact can only avert disease in terms of money, if we gauge that, so that would be just few thousand rupees. So that's not cost effective. If you are spending millions of rupees to study some fact, to create some new knowledge, and that new knowledge is just increasing the quality of life to a little bit, then that may not be cost effective. Ethical consideration. Your study must be confidential. Confidential, the data generated from the patients is completely anonymous, confidential, and no one else should have an access to that data. If you have hard copy form, paper forms, that should be put in under lock and key. If you have electronic data, that data must be encrypted and password protected. So this is a great way which you can use to find out your topic is worthy or not. Acceptability, cost effectiveness, and ethical consideration. You can give 3 marks at max and 1 mark minimum. So if your study, the proposed study, gain 1 mark on each of the criterion, and then the total would be 6 marks. And if you get the highest marks, the maximum marks would be 18. So any score above 15 is a good study and the topic is good. This marking and scoring system is all subjective. You have to do it honestly on your own. So coming to the hypothesis thing. What is hypothesis? Hypothesis is assumption statement. Is a testable theory or statement of belief used in evaluation of a population parameter of interest. For example, you are trying to compare treatment A and B for the management of infected wound of the foot. So your hypothesis would be what? There is no difference in treatment A and infected wound of the foot on patients coming to Civil Hospital Karachi during this period. So this would be your null hypothesis. There is no difference. And the researcher's hypothesis would be there is a difference. For example, if you are testing 2 regimes for anything, for any disease, so your null hypothesis would be there is no difference between the 2 regimes in terms of improvement. While if you put it as a researcher hypothesis, that's called alternative hypothesis. That hypothesis will be phrased like there is a difference in terms of improvement achieved by the treatment. That's called alternative hypothesis. So how do we make hypothesis? And how do we test hypothesis? First of all, we make a statement of research questions in terms of statistical hypothesis. That's both null and alternate hypothesis. So I'm going back to the slides which I showed you earlier here. For example, in this, take this number 3 example. Here we had a research question, and the research question was, is dressing A better than dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot? A and B. So is dressing A better than dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot? That was our research question. And then we have to convert this research question into the research objective, and then we'll formulate the research hypothesis. So first, the alternative hypothesis would be A and B are different. So A and B yes. Okay, thanks. So there is a difference in dressing A versus dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot. This is our alternative hypothesis. What would be our null hypothesis in this scenario? There is no difference in dressing A versus dressing B in treating the infected wound of the foot. And how do we assess the infected wound of the foot is being treated or not? We'll assess the angiogenesis, we'll assess the back to work, how early a person goes back to work, and how sooner the wound is healed. That's how we assess the effectiveness of dressing A and dressing B, right? For the second question, what is the relationship between maternal smoking and low birth weight? And the research objective were to determine association between maternal smoking and low birth weight. Our hypothesis was there is a relationship between maternal smoking and low birth weight. I hope you can sense that, you can assess here that we are just saying that there is a relationship. We are not stating that maternal smoking is more common in those women who are giving low birth weight, or we are not saying that maternal smoking is less common. We are just saying that there is a relationship, and that relationship could be either way, maybe in the positive direction or maybe in the negative direction, because right now we don't know. But with our background knowledge, current background knowledge, we know that smoking is hazardous. But what if instead of smoking, maternal smoking, there would be maternal COVID-19 infection? What is the relationship between maternal COVID-19 infection and low birth weight? If this would be the question, we don't know COVID-19 infection during pregnancy affect the birth weight of the baby or not, right? So we are moving forward with the slide we were talking here. So once we have a hypothesis, we analyze and assess that hypothesis with some statistical operations. And those are statistical operations usually require computer softwares such as SPSS or some other softwares, but SPSS is more popular among the students and faculty. So what should we do to test our hypothesis? First, we state our null and alternative hypothesis. Then we'll find out at what level of significance or alpha level we'll test our hypothesis. Conventionally, we test our hypothesis at 5% significance level or 5% alpha level. That is converted after the analysis into the p-value as 5% or 0.05. The cutoff is 0.05. Based on the available data, we choose the correct statistical technique, whether it is t-test, z-test, or a chi-square test. So for the third bullet, don't be afraid of these terminologies. You will be taught about these statistical tests in some later lectures. And in the fourth step, we perform our calculations and find out the relevant p-values or probability values. And on the basis of that p-value, we draw our conclusions. Whether we can reject the null hypothesis or we cannot reject the null hypothesis. If our p-value is set at 0.05 and if our p-value is 0.05 or under 0.05, then we can say we can reject the null hypothesis. In case where the p-value is above the 5%, then there is a chance we cannot reject the null hypothesis. Why I'm saying there is a chance? Because not every time you rely on the p-values, you always look at the 95% confidence intervals. And on the basis of that whole operation, you may take correct decisions where the null hypothesis was true and you do not reject the null hypothesis. That's a correct decision. Where the null hypothesis was false and you reject the null hypothesis on the basis of your research study, that's a correct decision to reject a false null hypothesis. But if the null hypothesis is true and you reject the null hypothesis, that's a kind of error that we desire to keep it at minimum. That's called alpha error or alpha level, that is kept at 5%, while the beta error is kept at 20%. So in summary, objective is one powerful and essential step in the manuscript writing, whatever the manuscript is. As you know, there are different types of manuscript: protocols, proposals, research papers, thesis, synopsis, everything. But objective is the pillar of any of the research manuscript. So, and it is reflected in different components of the research study, especially hypothesis, conclusion, and title of the study. And methods, study design, analysis plan, variables, all depends on objective statement. Thank you for your patience, and now I can take questions from your side. My email is there on the screen. You can note it down. I can take your questions now. So these were the books I would like to recommend you. Public Health and Community Medicine by Muhammad Ilyas, 8th edition. Now it's the 7th edition is converted into 8th edition, and the Park textbook, 25th edition, is in the market. What else you can? And these are the references which I would like you to refer to, which may be helpful. Okay. So we can collect that. We can collect the data from single hospital or many hospital. It's up to your objective. But if you are a student, I would like you to collect data from single hospital, because monitoring and arranging resources for a limited at a limited level is easy. So do it in a single hospital research study. Sometimes the institution review boards or scientific review committees also put an objection over such studies where the researcher has some ambitious plans. So, for example, if someone is trying to collect data from multiple hospitals from all over Sindh, would he or she be able to collect that data, that much or that big data? Maybe not. So don't write anything that you can't do. But in case you have resources, you can always write, I'll be collecting data from multiple hospitals. And a data which is from multiple hospitals for a condition that is spreaded to a wider geography, it is that study would be better. A multiple hospital study would be better. Multi-center study would be better than single hospital study. Assalamu alaikum assalam. Are the guidelines same when it comes to clinical trials? What guidelines? The guidelines for clinical trials are consort guidelines for reporting and making manuscript. The protocol guidelines are also there. As I told you in my previous lecture, I'll mention it again. The Equator Network website, Equator Network website for different types of guidelines. You can keep those as a reference. Yes, so single hospital, and you should have permission from the hospital when you are going to certain hospital, for example, civil hospital or any ward of the civil hospital. You should have the permission of that ward in charge or head of the department. You're welcome. So I keep those last 15 minutes for the questions and answers. It seems that, but we'll have our time here. And this one. Repeat for null hypothesis. Repeat for null hypothesis. You want me to give the lecture again for the null hypothesis? Is that what you want? Okay. How much patient history we have to collect? The extent of the history depends on the research objective, and how many patients means the number of patients that will be decided on the basis of previous statistics and sample size calculator. So maybe you are better off with 50 patients, or maybe you need to have histories from 500 patients. How do we get consent from patient in retrospective studies if we collect data directly from hospital and not the patients themselves? Very good question. In the retrospective data collection, we do not get direct permission from the patients, but for a hospital like civil hospital, that's a teaching hospital. So teaching hospitals are mandated to do research on the available data. So with the permission of institution review board and the respective department and the authorities of the hospital and the university, you can conduct research anonymously based on the patient data already collected in the files or the digital records. And you have a you are exempted to take individual consent from each of the patient, but all the other ethical rules are applied to that study, and the data confidentiality and other things do no harm. So someone was asking me about null hypothesis. So quickly, can I So what is a hypothesis? hypothesis is this way, it could be that way. That kind of assumption that treatment A is better than treatment B for the treatment of COPD. That kind of assumption. So if you have that kind of assumption that null is no difference in treatment A and B, that's called null hypothesis. And that null hypothesis always exists in the outer world. And the researcher, you, me, and any researcher is going to challenge that null hypothesis that is existing, that is already existing. And that null hypothesis is stating that there is no difference or there is no relationship. And we challenge that null hypothesis as there is a difference. And with that challenge, we try to prove with our data and our methods that on the basis of our data and methods, we try to prove that the difference really exists. Excuse me. If in the end, researcher fails to demonstrate that a difference, he or she, the researcher can say that I failed to reject the null hypothesis. A researcher never say that I will accept the null hypothesis, because the research itself is a cyclical process. And if at one point in time you are unable to reject the null hypothesis, or you fail to reject the null hypothesis, there is another time you can reject the null hypothesis in some other study or some other time. So you always say that I failed to reject the null hypothesis at this time or in this study or with this data and statistics, right? How to choose mentee or mentor? Mentor is the one who is supervising you, and mentee is one who is being supervised. So what your question is? Normally, I don't choose mentee. The mentee comes to me. So if I'm a mentor, there are lots of faculty in the Dow University of Health Sciences, in the basic sciences department, in the clinical sciences, in other disciplines, physical therapy and other. So based on your interest and your passion, you can contact any of the faculty. If he or she is interested in research and can collaborate with you, you can make a good relationship with them, make a team and document everything, keep everything in black and white. And you can directly contact anyone who you think could be a good mentor. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Abrar. Anything else? So how much time? We have 5 minutes more. I would like to spend those 5 minutes answering to your queries. For those who just have missed something, this is my email, just in case if you have further queries. Dr. Sana? I think we are done with the lecture and there are no more questions.